I present to you a collection of images that I observe in photographs taken by a weather satellite. In 2020, NASA concluded a massive study and showcased its results in a short video overview.
What you're seeing here is a model, specifically of carbon dioxide moving through the atmosphere, driven by wind patterns and circulation. To create this model, billions of data points informed by data collected from satellites and ground-based measurements were run through powerful supercomputers to scale observed behavior to a global stage. What makes this model stand out is that it's super high resolution, 128 times higher than a typical weather model and 500 times higher resolution than a typical climate model. This means we could focus on individual points like power plants and forest fires and see in extreme detail how these plumes move and get mixed in the atmosphere. Now, why is this important? Because by creating these high-resolution models, NASA scientists are able to better understand the behavior of Earth's interconnected systems, like how plumes of CO2 interact and spread with weather systems. For instance, you can clearly see the impact the day-night cycles have on CO2 emissions. This is due to daily fluctuations in human activities, cycles of photosynthesis, and fires flaring up and dying down.
Let's take a step back. Now I'll show you something I managed to discover. I'll demonstrate it in elements. It seems to me that a female face appears here. Her temple is slightly obscured, but this is not the entire image yet. It seems she is wearing a black turtleneck covering her neck, with a black shawl draped over her shoulders, adorned with red spots. The final touch to the image is a wide-brimmed hat. Now, returning to the original image, we can confirm that all the elements are present. Notice that a hand peeks out from under the shawl. This hand appears to be pointing at something. Here's another detail, a large bracelet on her wrist. Let me draw a symbolic outline of the finger, and let's see what lies in that area. Perhaps it's pointing to the end of an island, or perhaps to the Coral Sea. But if we look at the picture from a greater height, it might be that the hand is pointing to this underwater ridge, which in its contours may resemble a book. Now take a look at Australia. I'll increase the contrast and sharpen the image. Now it resembles a kangaroo's head. Next, I'll enhance the sharpness and contrast in another part of Australia. Here I see some sort of broad face with large eyes and pupils, though I can't say what it reminds me of. I'm sure many of you have questions, and I'll try to explain the nature of this phenomenon, but only after I show you other examples from my collection. The images I want to demonstrate are ones I observe on meteorological resources like SATI Point 24 and Mediapost. I go to the Maps section, find Europe from satellite, where new images appear every 15 minutes. In this column, you'll find pictures from the past 24 hours. I select this button to download all the images. You can enable the animation feature to see the movement of air masses. If I notice an interesting image, I save that frame and enhance it, making it more distinct by increasing contrast and sharpness in Photoshop. People who have already seen some of my pictures often ask the same question. Are you sure you're not adding anything to them? My answer is not straightforward. The thing is, cloud patterns don't always feature such distinctly recognizable images as in this example, where it's enough to crop the image and boost the contrast. Most often, images overlap, and when looking at the same area, different people may see different things. To demonstrate the image I see, I often shade out everything unrelated to its outline. This makes it easier for others to focus on the image without being distracted by other lines. I'd also like to point out that in most of these images, the eyes appear as anatomical pairs, and many even show clearly defined pupils. Animal shapes are often present, as well as hybrid, grotesque forms, part animal, part human. Occasionally, but rarely, there are entire scenes. I hope you enjoy my collection. I know these pictures may have frightened some of you, while others see them as a new form of creativity. I won't insist on any particular interpretation, but will share examples that explain the nature of such images and offer my own theory. One of the reasons for seeing such images can be explained by a phenomenon called pareidolia. Nearly all humans possess this ability, though to varying degrees. Pareidolia is the capacity of the human imagination to find similarities to familiar objects, such as seeing shapes in wall stains or associating images with something familiar, as in these pictures. This ability is considered a type of visual illusion, often used in creative pursuits, and relates to the psychology of perception. In this case, pareidolia can blur the line between imagination and reality. But to avoid jumping to conclusions, I'll outline all possible explanations and show the remaining observations. We've covered the psychological aspect, so let's move on to physical properties. When water evaporates from the surface of the earth or the ocean, warm air lifts water vapor into the upper layers of the atmosphere, where, under certain conditions, it condenses into water droplets or crystallizes into ice. Any solid microscopic particle in the air can act as a nucleus for condensation. These particles come from sources like dust and sandstorms, as well as microscopic ash particles from forest fires, visible as smoke, which under specific conditions also contribute to the formation of certain cloud types. Now let's define what the concept of an image means. Can we say that the heat radiated by a body demonstrates its image? I think with the advent of devices like thermal imagers, which detect infrared radiation, it's pointless to deny this. And if lighting conditions are insufficient to recognize an object, night vision devices easily provide us with this capability. We can also say that mist forming over a river creates, albeit with blurred edges, a conditional image, following the bends and shapes of its tributaries. Magnetometers show us nothing less than the images of an object's magnetic properties and magnetic fields. This principle is utilized in ground-penetrating radars, metal detectors, MRI machines, and space exploration. I'd also mention X-rays, which reveal hidden images. And this is far from all that expands the usual understanding of an image as merely the definition of shape, size, and color. What about ultrasound, which allows expectant mothers to see not only the outline of their baby and determine its gender, but much more? By the way, I forgot to mention that the images I find on weather satellite photographs are captured in infrared, eliminating the influence of light and shadow. In this way, continuously developing technical tools help us overcome our limitations and form an image in a broad sense.
Dog?
When examining large objects, such as an island, continent, ocean, or planet, one must consider the heterogeneity of their constituent areas. This is reflected in different combinations of radiation, as large objects are usually made up of many smaller ones with specific properties. For example, the mineral lapis lazuli often includes accompanying compounds like calcite and pyrite inclusions. I believe everyone is familiar with the well-known system that divides the human aura into subtle bodies. These energy bodies represent specific qualities, holding images of various properties. Analogies can be drawn to the specific natural characteristics of our planet. For instance, the causal body correlates with geological processes, such as plate movements and volcanic eruptions. The astral body corresponds to the hydrosphere, including oceans, seas, rivers, and clouds. The etheric body aligns with dust storms and gas emissions. In essence, everything we recognize with our vision or through technical means helps us create nothing less than an image. Anticipating your question, I'll answer it. Yes, I see images not only in clouds, because this is an innate ability, and in my case, it's a well-developed function of associations and analogies. Pareidolia is not merely an illusion. It's an integral part of our consciousness and the way we shape our world. I believe that its reverse side is one of the primary drivers for the evolutionary transformation of forms. I'm convinced that the phenomenon of mimicry is not a primitive instinct for self-preservation, but a deliberate transformation for specific purposes. In birds and fish, the effects of intentional illusion creation are captured in the shapes of their physical bodies. Take a look at insects that mimic plant leaves. This ability for imitation isn't limited to insects. Take, for example, the leaf-tailed gecko. And here's another master of camouflage. It almost seems as though it envies the authority of a famous reptile. Whether it's envy or creativity, I can't say, but even orchids are capable of this. Typically, the plant world uses such mimicry to attract pollinators. For instance, here's an imitation of a beetle. But how could these monkeys, these birds, or these little figures in dresses help them? And what does this cheerful group symbolize? Or this bird of paradise, for example, doesn't use its appearance to intimidate, but rather to make a good impression on someone. And here's an octopus trying to mimic a sea bass. Now it's blending in with the corals, imitating not only their color, but even growing body spikes resembling coral formations. In this sense, imagination is not just fantasy. It shapes reality. One can even envy the creative approach of this octopus. Thanks to our ability to recognize patterns and draw analogies, humans have named rocks, bays, and constellations. And what incredible shapes and images are formed by stellar nebulae, which we also name. For example, the Snail Nebula, or the Eye of God, the Eagle Nebula, or the Crab Nebula. Nebulae contain fascinating features like the pillars of creation, the fairy, and others. Here's the Orion Nebula and the Horsehead Nebula, for instance. Many of these shapes only loosely match their names, and I often see entirely different images in them. But in any case, regardless of these intriguing forms, or even the absence of associations in our perception, each nebula has its unique identity. How about this nebula? This is the Hand of God, a wind nebula formed by the explosion of a neutron star. In 2023, by combining the capabilities of two X-ray telescopes, NASA scientists visualize how charged particles producing X-rays move along the magnetic field, outlining the primary shape of the nebula, resembling the bones of a human hand. And if the universe contains a hand of God, why wouldn't there be a cat's paw? Summarizing these examples, we can say that an image is a radiated expression, a reflection of manifested properties. Some might argue that a scientific approach always relies on consistent statistics, and that such patterns cannot repeat in these clouds. To that, I can offer examples of images that frequently appear over Turkey. Over several years, I've gathered selected patterns. It's easy to see that one recurring figure can easily be identified. These shapes form in low-lying clouds, which suggests they are influenced by the landscape's features. Examining the local terrain reveals similar outlines of certain components of the figure. Depending on changing conditions and wind direction, it can appear as though the figure's expression changes. If that can be somewhat explained, then how can we explain the constantly changing figure's hats that forms over the sea? Here, the headgear resembles a top hat, while in this image, it looks more like the hat of Polish military officers. complete with what resembles an emblem in the shape of the letter A. Now let's look at the landscape where a figure made of carbon dioxide has emerged. Its hand and shawl are constant outlines of the islands, but where the face is formed, things are less straightforward. Unfortunately, I have limited observations from other parts of the planet, but let's look at North America. Now take a look at Canada. Cropping the image for demonstration, sharpening the boundaries, and converting it to black and white makes the male facial features more noticeable. When we return to the original image, the outlines are easily recognizable without enhancements. His head has fragmented into several small islands, but it's easy to see they once formed a whole. Unfortunately, I don't track clouds over this area, so I cannot provide additional comparisons. However, I'd like to highlight details present in specific images from my collection. For example, this character. His attire corresponds to a specific historical period and fashion of the time. The shape of the beard, the cap, and a double-collared cloak. Or here we see a high lace collar and an epaulette on his uniform. Another figure resembles contemporaries of Gogol, wearing a fur coat with a short collar and a hat. While imagination might be needed to complete the hat, look at this female profile. Her headwear, with many intricate details, resembles the traditional attire of Balkan peoples. Did you also notice the cute puppy's face above her head? Here's a masculine figure, wearing a tricorn and a uniquely folded collar, resembling the captain of an old sailing ship. And this is clearly a representative of Muslim traditions in a kaftan, though the high headpiece is somewhat unusual. What do you think of this character in a turban? Look at this intriguing character over Spain. I see an older woman with an elaborate hairstyle, adorned with jewelry, wearing a summer dress with bare shoulders and a wide sleeve, resembling a dancer's outfit. Now let me show you the details within these narrative images. In this image, I see an old man in rags with a frightened expression on his face, turning around and reaching out blindly with his hand. On his arm, above the elbow, there's some sort of a bracelet, or perhaps even a crown. What he's reaching toward appears to be nothing less than the open jaws of some monstrous creature, resembling the head of a giant snake. Here I want to demonstrate an example where I had to shade overlapping details to avoid confusion. At the center is some kind of creature, its head somewhat reminiscent of a skull. Behind its head, there's a bird. A small cross hangs around its neck. One of its hands is holding something, while the other hovers above the face of a person, tilting their head back. On this person's face, a token with a cross-shaped hole is falling. This raises a question. Could these details simply be pareidolia interpretations if other viewers see them too? As a former professional photographer with 25 years of experience across various specialties, I understand how the reverse side of pareidolia is used to create stereogram effects, camouflaging images within intricate patterns. Here's a great example. By the way, what do you see here? I also know how effectively, creatively, and spectacularly these techniques are applied in the advertising industry. Now I'd like to invite you to examine a fragment of a satellite image and observe the density of overlapping images. Usually, I don't include such heavily layered images in my collection, nor do I work with images smaller than the size of the Czech Republic, since they're harder to showcase. I imagine the first image that catches your eye is this one, or perhaps this one, or even this one. And these are just a few of the figures you can find here. How about this larger one? As I've mentioned before, larger images can contain smaller ones. Remember the owl? Its wingspan measures 2,000 kilometers. How about images spanning half of Europe? But even that's not the limit. Some images are of such massive scale that they're not even visible to astronauts aboard the ISS. Now let's remove the cloud cover and view the terrain through Google Earth. Here's that familiar Canadian image. And now a vast area of Eurasia. Let's examine Earth's surface from a different angle. What do you think of this scale? Here's the mouth, the eye, and the hairstyle. And believe me, I've discovered many such images. I won't reveal them just yet. They'll be saved for my next film. Now, the remaining question is, how should we interpret all of this? First and foremost, it's essential to understand that an image is not a sentient being, a demon, or a deity. An image is simply a consequence of something that has happened or is happening, a visible smoke from a past fire. Smoke is not the cause of the fire. It's merely a form representing the aftermath of certain processes. The same applies to landforms shaped by geological processes and erosion. Fear that some might feel arises only when we presume that these images are intelligent and capable of influencing processes at will. This is not the case. They are merely history, inertia, a residue like an astral shell. While these residues can manifest as accumulated rain or haze, they are purely natural processes devoid of consciousness. However, they should be acknowledged without attributing sinister meanings to them. Finally, to conclude this rather lengthy analysis, I offer a curated collection of more or less presentable images that I've gathered over the course of 2024.